Let's talk about wide receivers that you should start or sit in week 10 of the fantasy season. We've got 4 teams on bye: the Browns, Packers, Raiders, and Seahawks. So you will be without big names like Cedric Tillman, Jaden Reed, Romeo Dobbs, Jacoby Myers, DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith in Hingba. But in today's video, I've got you. We'll talk through all 28 teams in play, 14 matchups in total, starting with Thursday Night Football, Bengals at Ravens, a divisional matchup. The Bengals need to get this win. They are on the outside looking in, but they've got a couple wins in a row so far. These two teams absolutely hate each other, so it'll be a good one. 52.5-point over-under, highest over-under of the week on a Thursday night. Yes, please. Thank you. Ravens are favored by 6.5 points, and honestly, the entire game script is so good for the Bengal wide receivers. At the time of recording this video, I don't know if T. Higgins will play or not, but of course, if he is in play, we're going to go ahead and put him into our lineups. He'll be my wide receiver 13 this week. Jamar Chase, my wide receiver 1. In the past 4 weeks, the Ravens are the best matchup for your wide receiver in fantasy football. And if you look at the opposite side of this matchup, the Bengals have been kind of middle of the pack. And by the way, throughout this entire video, we will be looking at the last 4 weeks when we talk about points allowed and these matchups, because I feel like it's the best way to represent where defense's form currently lies. So got to start Jamar Chase, the wide receiver 1 in fantasy, in the best matchup in fantasy, in a high over-under, in a game where they're going to need both of these guys to be healthy. Yes, please. We're going to start both of those names. On the opposite side of the ball, Zay Flowers, a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy football this year, out there looking like Tyreek Hill. Is that crazy to say? That last touchdown he got last week versus Denver, I mean, that looked like a Tyreek Hill clone. You got to play him again in a high over-under. He has been so good this year. All right, not going to play Deontay Johnson, not going to play Rashad Bateman. I just don't think there's enough targets to go around, although I do think Deontay is going to be more involved moving forward. All right, the second game we'll look at, this is in Germany, Deutschland. I believe it's a 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time start, so make sure you've set your lineups early this week. We've got Giants and Panthers. Sorry, Germany. Did we want them to like the NFL? Who thought this was a good idea? Who thought it was a good idea to give Germany the Giants and the Panthers? Do you want to spread the game internationally? I mean, no disrespect to these two teams, but who the hell made this schedule? Anyway, let's talk about the matchup. 41.5-point over under. The Giants are favored. Malik Neighbors, you're always going to put him into your lineup, getting such a high volume of targets. He's had 11 targets in week 9 versus the Commanders, 13 targets versus the Steelers in week 8. You got to keep putting him into your lineup, even though Daniel Jones hasn't been playing well. And then after his hot start, Wan'Dale Robinson has really cooled off recently. In fact, he hasn't had a game over 10 points since week 10. You know, he did have a touchdown called back versus the Commanders, so give him some credit there. And then on the opposite side of the ball, Xavier Legette, look, he's a spot start. You can put him out there if you're in a desperate situation. I know a lot of you guys are dealing with injuries and buys, but just be aware that he is kind of a touchdown or bust player right now. He's had a touchdown in 4 out of his last 6 games. And again, in 4 out of his last 6 games, he's had a good performance. So if you can bank on a touchdown, he'll be a decent flex. Otherwise, I don't think you'll want to start him. You know, Bryce Young, it's better than what we thought it would be so far, but there's just no consistency yet. We need to see multiple games of Bryce Young being able to deliver for his fantasy wide receivers. And I know Jalen Coker is this big name, you know, a sleeper guy, but I've got him as a must sit. I just feel like in 99% of leagues, you'll have a better name to start than Jalen Coker. But of course, if you want to party and you've got a feeling, then you can put him out there if you want to. All right, the third matchup we'll look at here, start of the 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slate of games, Patriots at the Chicago Bears. 38.5-point over-under. This is the second lowest over-under of the week. The sports books do not think we'll see a lot of points, a lot of fantasy points in this one, so be very cautious chasing this matchup, specifically with the Chicago Bears. You know, I'm still going to label DJ Moore a must start. It's been really bad. I mean, let's be honest here. It's not been good for DJ Moore, but he did have that blow-up game against the Panthers in week number 5. And ultimately, we know he and Caleb Williams are still just trying to get on the same page. At least in week 9, he had 9 targets. So at least you can hang your hat on that. Look, he's my wide receiver 25, so I don't have him in my top 24, but I still think you can put him in your flex and see what happens. And then as far as Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze, again, it's a low over-under. We don't think there'll be a lot of fantasy points. The Bears are favored by almost a touchdown. There's a very realistic chance that the Bears are kind of running the clock out in the second half, and you might not need some of these wide receivers. So be very cautious chasing these names this week. And then on the opposite side of the ball, you can spot start Demario Pop Douglas. He is the wide receiver to chase if you're going to start one of them with Drake May. But, you know, and also I will say, like, the matchup versus Chicago doesn't scare me so much for a slot wide receiver. We know Jalen Johnson's playing on the outside. He's really concerning, but Pop plays in the slot. So he is a fine DFS play if you need. All right, we're going to move on here to the Bills at the Colts. All right, look, was not exactly what we wanted to see from Joe Flacco last week, but I still believe there will be better games ahead. We have seen 3 great games from Joe Flacco this year and for his wide receivers. So I am going to continue to say to start them. I'm going to continue to start these wide receivers in my leagues. For example, Josh Downs and Michael Pittman. The good news is Josh Downs had a 32% target share last week. He had 8 targets, which was double the amount of targets that Michael Pittman had. He had more targets than any other player on the team. I still think Josh Downs is going to have great games in the future. I think that could be this week. Michael Pittman is my wide receiver 30, so he's literally on the edge of like a spot start and a must start. I do think you can play him in this game, and I do believe that the Colts will need to throw the ball, so Pittman will need to be an important part of this offense. On the opposite side of the ball, Khalil Shakir is a top 20 wide receiver in fantasy football, y'all, and he's missed a game. Not because of a bye week, he just missed a game. And he's still a top 20 wide receiver. He's had 7 or more targets in the last 3 weeks, including a 10-target game versus the Seattle Seahawks, over 107 yards. You can absolutely play him in this matchup. Amari Cooper, Keon Coleman, I'm concerned that both of these guys are going to eat into each other's opportunities. These guys are boom bust, man. I mean, if you have a feeling, sure, you can put them out there, but there's been no reliability with either of these names to really rely on right now. And Keon Coleman is dealing with a wrist injury. He might be out this week. We just don't have that information yet. All right, the 5th matchup we'll look at is the Vikings at the Jaguars. All right, 46.5 point over under. The Vikings are favored by 4.5 points. Jefferson, of course, you're going to start the best wide receiver in the NFL today. Jordan Addison is a spot start. He had a really good bounce back last week versus the Indianapolis Colts. 5 catches, 42 yards, and a touchdown on 92% of the snaps. He's out there. He's running a ton of routes, and in good matchups, you can play him. I think that's this matchup this week versus the Jaguars. They're actually a top 10 matchup for your wide receivers in the last 4 weeks, giving up the 9th most points to position. And then on the opposite side of the ball, great week to go ahead and play Brian Thomas. He did have a quiet game in week 9 versus the Eagles. Honestly, though, a lot of people don't realize that the Eagles defense has really picked it up in the last 4 or 5 weeks. They and Washington have done a complete 180. So I'm not surprised Brian didn't have his best ever game. But in this matchup versus the Vikings, it's the second best matchup for wide receivers in the last 4 weeks. They're going to need to throw the ball. Brian Thomas is primed to have a huge, huge game. And if you need a desperation play, you can throw Parker Washington out there, who led wide receivers in targets with 6 versus the Eagles. He's kind of taking over that Christian Kirk role in the slot. All right, let's move on to the Broncos at the Chiefs, an AFC West showdown. The Chiefs are favored by 9.5 points. That's the largest spread of the week, which makes the Broncos the biggest underdogs of the week. To be honest, personally, even as someone who supports the Chiefs, that feels like that line is too big for me. 9.5 points, this isn't like the 2019 Kansas City Chiefs. This offense is not obliterating defenses. I just feel like that line is too large. But the reality is DeAndre Hopkins, definitely someone that has got to go into your lineups now. We saw what he looked like with full-time action on Monday Night Football. He had 9 targets, 8 catches, 86 yards, and 2 touchdowns, over 28 fantasy points. Clearly, Xavier Worthy is just not that guy. You're not that guy, pal. You are our MVS replacement. You're the speed guy. You'll get 3 to 4 touches per game. We'll try and see if we can stretch the field vertically, but the offense is going to run through Travis Kelce and DeAndre Hopkins. So you can definitely start D-Hop moving forward. On the opposite side, Courtland Sutton was one of my starts of the week last week, and he had, 25 fantasy points, but I'm a little bit more hesitant versus the Kansas City Chiefs. In the last 4 weeks, they've been one of the worst matchups for your fantasy wide receivers. In the entire year, they've been one of the worst matchups. So I'd be hesitant to start him, but if you need a spot start, just infuse your flex with some upside. I can see why you would want to put him out there, but there's not another Broncos wide receiver we're going to put trust in this week. All right, moving on to the Falcons at the Saints. From the AFC West to the NFC South, 46.5 point over under. That's a very healthy line. There should be a lot of points scored in this matchup. We know anytime these two teams go at it, anything's on the table. The Falcons are favored by 3 points. Drake London is definitely going to go straight back into my lineups if he plays. Now, at the time of recording this, we don't know for sure if he'll play or not. Honestly, my opinion is that throughout this entire week, he'll be questionable. He might get some limited practices in, and then you'll kind of have to wait until Saturday night, Sunday morning to know if he's going to play. Right now, Raheem Morris is calling him day to day, which is good news because it could have been much more negative with that hip pointer. Now, regardless of if London plays or not, Darnell Mooney is going to be a must start for me. The wide receiver 12 on the season, back-to-back weeks with the touchdown, back-to-back weeks over 18 PPR points. And if Drake London is ruled out, Darnell Mooney becomes my wide receiver 17. I'll have even more confidence in him attached to Kirk Thuggins. And then if Drake London is ruled out, Ray McLeod becomes a really fun desperation play to kind of throw in there if you're looking for a Hail Mary. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, I do not believe Chris Olave is going to play. Now, that hasn't been reported at the time of recording this video, but I'm believing that he's going to be out at least this week, if not multiple weeks. It is his second concussion in a couple weeks. I think it's his fifth concussion in the past 2 years. He was literally carted off the field. He went to a hospital. I don't know. This doesn't sound like he's going to play this week. I would be absolutely shocked. So look, Mason Tipton is probably going to be the wide receiver 1 on this team, but I don't see a reason to play any Saints wide receiver. It's just too messy. It'll be a lot of Taysom Hill. It'll be a lot of Alvin Kamara, Juwan Johnson thrown in there. I don't know, guys. I can't advise you to start a Saints wide receiver. All right, the 8th matchup we'll look at here is the Bucs and the 49ers. The Bucs going back home after a devastating loss in overtime. It's a high over-under 47.5 points. The Niners are favored by 6.5 points. Deebo Samuel. We're going to play Deebo Samuel, baby. We're going to put him straight into our lineups. I'm expecting Deebo Samuel to be a league winner when it counts the most. And we're talking about this stretch from here until fantasy championship week. Without Brandon Ayuk, I think he's going to absolutely dominate for fantasy football purposes. We're definitely firing him up. And then Juwan Jennings, if he's out there on the waiver wire, you can pick him up right now. Of course, in larger leagues, he'll already be rostered, but you can totally play him this week. He's my wide receiver 29. It's a decent matchup versus the Bucs, who have given up the 3rd most points to wide receivers in the past 4 weeks. You can definitely put him straight into your lineups. And then Ricky Pearsall, you can definitely play him, but I would lower my expectations for Ricky. When Juwan Jennings is healthy and out there, I just think Ricky will kind of be reverted to the 4th option. And you have to think about this. If CMC's out there as well, Ricky might become the 5th option in the offense between Kittle, CMC, Deebo, Juwan Jennings. So just lower your expectations for slick Ricky Pearsall. And on the opposite side of the ball, look, I know Sterling Shepard had a pretty decent game on Monday Night Football. Most of that came in garbage time, so I'm not really sure how much we can trust that on a week-to-week basis with his 10 fantasy points he got, 47 yards. But if Jalen McMillan plays, he's just so talented. I think they want to feature him, so I am willing to spot start him if it's anybody in that offense. All right, the 9th matchup we'll look at here is Steelers at Commanders. How about them Commanders, baby? 7-2. It is so fun to watch that team. Great to see them doing well. Now, for the Commanders, they have done a complete 180 with their defense. Guys, if you look at the first 4 weeks of the season and the last 4 weeks of the season, it's complete 180. It really is. The Commanders have been one of the worst matchups for your running backs and your wide receivers in the last 4 weeks. They've completely turned it around over there. Dan Quinn is really cooking in the kitchen, but I still think you can start George Pickens. He's been very, very good since Russell Wilson took over for this team. He had 9 targets in week 7 versus the Jets and a touchdown over 100 yards. And in week 8 versus the Giants, you'll remember this Sunday Night Football game, he should have had 2 touchdowns. He still finished with over 11 points without a touchdown. So I think he's going to be a must-start moving forward as long as Russell Wilson is playing. And then on the opposite side, of course, you're going to start Terry McLaurin, the wide receiver 7 on the season. He only had 2 catches last week, but they were both touchdowns, thank God. I'm just going to keep putting him into my lineup regardless of matchup at this point. And Noah Brown is a fun pickup off the waiver wire, but I wouldn't play him right now. All right, the 10th matchup we'll look at here is Titans at Chargers. This is the start of the 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slate of games. This is the lowest over-under of the week. So be very, very cautious chasing names that aren't the clear number ones on these offenses. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, Nick Westbrook-Ikini has had 4 touchdowns in the last 4 games. He's had a touchdown in every single matchup. I don't want to chase him in this game, though. It's a low over-under. There shouldn't be a lot of points scored. The Chargers are favored by 7.5 points. The Titans are huge underdogs. I just don't want to start Nick Westbrook-Ikini. But Calvin Ridley, of course you can start Calvin Ridley. I mean, he's got competent quarterback play with Mason Rudolph now, and he's averaging well over 12 targets per game in the last 2 weeks. I definitely think he's in play. On the opposite side of the ball, it means you can start Ladd McConkey. He's a clear leader in snaps, routes run, targets for the Los Angeles Chargers, but I'm not going to go ahead and chase a good game from Quentin Johnston or Josh Palmer. It's just not a matchup I really want to chase for any of those names. All right, moving on to the Jets at the Cardinals, 45.5 point over under. The Jets are favored, but it's a very close spread. Garrett Wilson and Davante Adams both must starts. I think what we saw last week is what we're going to start to see more and more often. Now, don't expect Garrett Wilson to get 2 touchdowns every week, but what I mean by that is Davante Adams getting anywhere from 8 to 12 targets and Garrett Wilson getting the same, anywhere from 8 to 12 targets. And what they do on top of that is ultimately up to them. But the good news is you don't have Allen Lazard anymore, kind of muddling up the target share. He is on the IR, so it'll be very, very clear for this team. Davante Adams, Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, and it will funnel through those 3 names. And the offense is really improving in the last couple of weeks. On the opposite side of the ball, it's been boom bust for Marvin Harrison, but I'm going to continue to put him into my lineups in matchups where you feel like you can start him. The Jets sound like a scary matchup, and they have been in the last couple of weeks, but think about it. Tank Dell recently was a good play. George Pickens recently was a good play against the Jets. So I do think you can beat them, and I'm going to put Marvin Harrison into my lineups. I'm going to continue to rely on him. All right, let's move on to an NFC East showdown. The Eagles at the Cowboys. 7-point favorites the Eagles are heading into this one. And of course, that's because Dak Prescott has been ruled out with a hamstring injury. So we are going to have to drastically lower expectations for this wide receiver room in Dallas. CeeDee Lamb normally would be a top 5 start for me. He's now 15th. So definitely still in the must-start category, but I would really lower expectations. And by the way, CeeDee Lamb himself might not even play. I mean, he's dealing with a sprained AC joint. That's in your shoulder. So it'll be up and down each and every day this week. If he plays, I definitely think you can start him. But again, lower your expectations. It doesn't look like CeeDee Lamb's going to be like a league winner this year, but he's still going to be a decent start each and every week. And then Jalen Tolbert, I'll put in that spot start category because this team is likely going to be down most games. On the opposite side of the ball, if A.J. Brown plays, and there was good news on Monday night, he had no issues with his knee. It is a chance to play this week. If he plays, he's a top 3 pick for me amongst wide receivers. And if he doesn't, Devonta Smith, top 15 play for me. Already my wide receiver 16 regardless, coming off a couple really good stretches of games. If there's no A.J. Brown, he's got to be in every single lineup this week. All right, moving on to Sunday Night Football. We've got Lions at Texans, 48.5 point over-under, the 3rd highest over-under of the week. The Lions are favored, but it's a close spread, so we should see a lot of points from both sides. Amon-Ra St. Brown, of course, you're going to start a superstar like Amon-Ra, but the good news is if you own Jameson Williams, he will be back from suspension. He has been reinstated after that 2-game absence, and he is one of those really fun boom-bust players that you can kind of throw into your lineup. He's kind of like a surprise player, really. Like sometimes he can go off and win your week. Other times he can completely cost you your week. But either way, he's a really fun party pick. If you like to party, you can put him in. The Texans are 20th in points allowed, so it's not a incredible matchup, but you can definitely play him. On the opposite side, Tank Dell is a must start. I don't think Nico Collins plays this week. I still think we're a couple weeks out from him coming back. But Tank Dell, my wide receiver 19, he's been so good in the last couple weeks. Last week versus the Jets, 6 catches, 126 yards. And we have to remember that Tank Dell was recovering from a very serious injury. All right. The same injury that Tony Pollard took a while to recover from, the same injury that Mark Andrews took a while to recover from. So Tank Dell should be much better rest of season. And by the way, if Nico Collins plays, of course you're going to start Nico Collins. I'm just a little bit hesitant on if that's going to be the case or not. And moving on to the last game of the week, we've got Dolphins at Rams, Monday Night Football. This is the second highest over-under of the week, 50.5 points, a very high line. The Rams are favored by 2.5 points, and there should be a ton of fantasy success. So many fantasy matchups will be determined by Monday Night Football. Think about it. You got Tua. You've got Matthew Stafford. You've got Devon Achane, Kyren Williams, Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, Jalen Waddle. All these wide receivers are in play for me. It's been really, really strange to watch the Miami Dolphins offense recently. I'm not going to lie to you. It feels like they're really sticking to the run game, which is what worked for them when Tua was out. But the reality is they have Tua now. I don't understand why there are so many dump-offs to Achane. They're not stretching the field vertically at all. But I just refuse to believe that with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, that is going to be your game plan moving forward. I think in matchups where it's going to be much closer, higher over-unders, they are going to throw the ball more, and that's what I anticipate in this matchup versus the Rams, who are on a winning streak. Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, both guys that you absolutely have to have in your lineup. At the time of recording, I don't know if Puka will be disciplined for the ejection he had. To be honest, it was completely weak that they threw him out. That was one of the weakest punches I've ever seen. I'm shocked they threw him out. So I don't think they'll suspend him. But if he's out there, you got to start him regardless. All right. I appreciate y'all for watching the video. Maybe you're watching this and you have a really tough start-sit decision this week. If you do, check out the pinned comment. There's a link where you can ask me a question at any time, fantasy football related. And if you don't have a free account on Flock Fantasy just yet, I can't encourage you more to go out and do that. Flockfantasy.com/land. When you use the promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, you will get a couple things for free when you sign up for an account for free, right? The My Team feature, the expert consensus rankings, and the trade calculator. I appreciate y'all for watching this. The running back video is already up. Go watch that on the channel, and we'll see you guys soon. Nothing but love. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.